The morning flight from Dallas-Fort Worth to Chicago began like any other for Flight 417. The sun had just risen, painting the tarmac gold, as passengers filed onto the Boeing 737. Some clutched laptops, others carried coffee cups, and a few stared blankly at the ceiling, lost in their thoughts. The hum of rolling wheels on the jetway mixed with the muted chatter of travelers. Among them was a teenage girl, her fingers nervously drumming on the armrest, a businessman rehearsing a speech, an elderly couple holding hands as if the flight itself was an unseen threat. Yet, no one sensed the storm that would descend from within the cockpit. Captain Mark Reynolds, a seasoned 38-year-old pilot with 15 years of experience, performed his pre-flight checklist with meticulous precision. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, buttons pressed, levers toggled, dials scanned. Mark had flown through thunderstorms, icy winds, and mechanical failures. He had seen emergencies that would make a rookie pale. Today, however, there was a strange tightness in his chest that he ignored, dismissing it as nerves or fatigue. Beside him, First Officer Jenna Hayes, 27, was already adjusting her headset, her knuckles white as she gripped the yoke. This was her first solo international rotation in U.S. airspace, and excitement mingled with anxiety. The cabin crew completed their final announcements. "Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables stowed," the lead flight attendant Maria said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of routine authority. Passengers obediently complied. The engines roared to life, vibrating beneath the floorboards, a reassuring rumble to some, a foreboding growl to others. The plane taxied, then accelerated down the runway, lifting smoothly into the sky. For the first 30 minutes, everything seemed ordinary. The morning sun glinted off the wings, clouds passed lazily beneath the aircraft, and passengers settled into their routines, scrolling through phones, reading, or dozing. Mark sipped coffee, enjoying the bitter warmth that grounded him amid the mechanical precision of flight. Jenna monitored the instruments, voice soft but confident as she read altitudes and speeds aloud. Conversation between them was minimal but professional, punctuated only by the occasional hum of autopilot adjustments. Then, without warning, a violent shudder ran through the plane. Drinks splashed from cups, and a murmur of alarm rippled through the cabin. Passengers tightened their seatbelts instinctively. A child whimpered. The turbulence was unlike anything Mark had experienced, jerky, unpredictable, almost as if the plane had hit an invisible wall in the sky. "Just a spike," Mark muttered, though his voice carried a tension that didn't escape Jenna. "Hold steady," he instructed, gripping the yoke, but his face, usually stoic and commanding, betrayed the first signs of real fear. A sweat bead traced down his temple, his hands trembling slightly. And then it happened. Mark's grip faltered. His hand twitched on the controls as if something had seized him from within. Jenna noticed immediately. The seasoned pilot's face was pale, almost ashen, lips pressed tight. "Captain," she asked, leaning closer, "are you okay?" There was no response. Time seemed to stretch. The hum of the engines, the steady roar of air passing the wings, and the faint chatter from the cabin crew became background noise to the panic swelling in Jenna's chest. Mark's head slumped forward onto the yoke. His body went limp, a terrifyingly still figure in the cockpit that had once radiated authority and command. Jenna's mind raced. She had studied emergencies in simulators, dozens of scenarios, but nothing could prepare her for a real pilot collapsing mid-flight, with hundreds of lives hanging by a thread. Her hands hovered over the controls, shaking. The autopilot was engaged, but she had never fully trusted it. A misstep could send the plane into a downward spiral in seconds. From the cabin, passengers began to sense that something was wrong. The murmurs grew louder. Maria, the lead flight attendant, glanced toward the cockpit door, concern etched into her face. She had seen captains faint before, but Mark Reynolds was different, strong, disciplined, never prone to weakness. Something serious had happened. Jenna's voice cracked as she reached for the radio. Mayday, Mayday, Flight 417. Pilot is unconscious. I repeat, pilot is unconscious. We need immediate assistance. The words echoed through the cockpit, sharp and urgent, bouncing into the ether where commercial and military planes picked them up. On radar screens hundreds of miles away, an F-22 squadron training in Illinois froze. One particular call sign flashed across the leader's monitor: Raven 51. Lieutenant Cole Hammond, the lead pilot, recognized it instantly. Raven 51 wasn't just any civilian pilot. It was a call sign from a classified program he had once trained under. The name commanded respect, attention, and immediate action. The squadron adjusted course, their jets slicing through clouds like silver blades, heading straight for Flight 417. Back in the cabin, chaos grew. Passengers clutched their armrests. Coffee had spilled across a lap, and a young boy screamed, clutching his mother's sleeve. Flight attendants moved quickly, attempting to calm the crowd while also checking the cockpit door. Jenna, meanwhile, wrestled with the yoke, unsure if she could stabilize the plane without the captain. The 737 lurched and swayed, the autopilot fighting her every command, the engines whining in protest. Minutes, or was it seconds, felt like an eternity. Jenna's mind ran on instinct, adrenaline fueling her every move. She tried to recall everything she had learned in simulators, every emergency checklist drilled into her memory. Autopilot, hold level flight, maintain altitude, stabilize, stabilize. She muttered under her breath, voice trembling. From outside, the F-22s streaked closer, radar signatures flickering like lightning across instruments. Cole barked into the squadron headset, mobilizing with precision born from years of combat training. Intercept, maintain visual, be ready to guide, he commanded. Every pilot understood. Flight 417's fate was now entangled with theirs. In the cabin, the tension was palpable. A businessman whispered a prayer under his breath. The teenage girl's eyes were wide with fear, frozen on the ceiling panels as though willing them to support her. Maria's hands trembled as she gripped a handrail, heart hammering in her chest. Every second stretched painfully, the quiet panic amplified by the deafening roar of engines. Jenna glanced at Mark, still slumped, still unresponsive. "Hang on, Captain, hang on," she whispered, voice breaking. Her hands gripped the yoke like a lifeline, a fragile tether to the 180 lives depending on her. Outside, the F-22s maintained formation, sleek shadows against the morning sun, poised to intervene, to protect, to guide, but not yet touching the plane. It was a moment suspended in time, a perfect storm of fear, responsibility, and uncertainty. Jenna's heart pounded in her ears. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a question nagged: can I really fly this plane alone? Can I bring everyone down alive? As the first warning alarms blared in the cockpit and turbulence continued to batter the fuselage, one thing was certain: nothing about Flight 417 would ever be ordinary again. And above all, high in the sky, a single call sign, Raven 51, had been triggered, setting into motion a chain of events that would soon reach supersonic speeds. The plane continued to shudder. Jenna's hands trembled on the controls, and the passengers' quiet terror swelled into a palpable, almost electric fear. In that moment, suspended between heaven and earth, Flight 417 teetered on the edge of disaster. Jenna's hands shook violently as she held the yoke, staring at the slumped form of Captain Mark Reynolds. His breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible, and his once commanding face looked drained of life. The cockpit was silent except for the steady hum of engines and the shrill blare of warning alarms. She fumbled for the radio, fingers trembling as she pressed the call button. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 417. Pilot is unconscious. We need immediate assistance," she shouted, voice cracking. Her words cut through the dense, humid air, bouncing off distant radio towers and into the skies, reaching commercial planes and, unexpectedly, a squadron of F-22 fighters conducting a training exercise over Illinois. Lieutenant Cole Hammond, seated in the lead jet of the squadron, froze as the call sign blinked across his monitor. Raven 51. His heart skipped a beat. That call sign was not just any pilot. It belonged to someone he had trained under in a top-secret military program, a mentor whose guidance had shaped his own career. "Did you hear that?" Cole barked to his wingman, eyes narrowing. "Flight 417, Raven 51, something's wrong." The squadron immediately adjusted course, supersonic engines roaring as they cut through clouds, leaving contrails that glimmered like silver ribbons in the morning sun. The commercial 737 was tiny from their altitude, yet every instrument reading told them this was serious. The radar confirmed the emergency. The plane was off course, altitude fluctuating, autopilot struggling to maintain stability. Back inside the 737, Jenna's fear escalated into sheer panic. She glanced at the instrument panel, reading altitudes and speeds that seemed to fluctuate by the second. She tried to maintain level flight, but turbulence, mechanical alarms, and her own uncertainty created a terrifying cocktail. Passengers looked on, sensing that something catastrophic was unfolding. Maria, the lead flight attendant, crouched in the aisle trying to maintain calm. She glanced toward the cockpit and froze as she saw the captain slumped forward, motionless. "Everyone, please stay seated. Remain calm," she called, voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. The passengers' murmurings escalated, some whispering prayers, others holding children tightly. Jenna's mind raced. Her training kicked in, but fear gnawed at her focus. "Autopilot, keep level, check airspeed, stabilize," she muttered. The autopilot was working, but the plane shuddered as if resisting her commands. Panic surged through her chest like a tidal wave. She had read manuals, watched simulations, studied hundreds of scenarios, but nothing could prepare her for a living, breathing crisis with 180 lives in her hands. Then the F-22s appeared on the horizon, a formation of sleek, silver shadows moving with precision. Passengers pressed against the windows, gasping as the supersonic jets carved through the sky above them. The roar of their engines was deafening even at a distance, and some instinctively ducked, expecting the jets to collide with their plane. Jenna, meanwhile, realized that help was coming, but not the kind she expected. Over the radio, a voice broke through, calm yet commanding. "Flight 417, this is Raven 51. Maintain current heading. Autopilot override will guide you. Do not panic. Repeat, do not panic." Jenna's hands trembled as she clutched the yoke. Her mind screamed, "Raven 51. But that's a military call sign." She pressed the radio button, her voice shaking. "Raven 51, this is Flight 417. Pilot is unconscious. I'm the first officer. I need instructions, please." The response was immediate, precise, and almost eerily calm. "Jenna Hayes, I've got visual. Follow my lead. Trust your hands, not your fear. Keep the plane level. I'm guiding you down. Do not attempt any sudden maneuvers. Emergency vehicles are ready on the runway. Stay focused." Jenna swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility pressing down like a physical force. She glanced at Mark again, wishing desperately that he could wake up. The man who had always been the anchor of this flight was now a lifeless presence, leaving her to navigate the impossible. Meanwhile, Cole Hammond coordinated with his squadron, issuing split-second instructions. "Delta 1, position above and to the right. Delta 2, flank the left. Keep the corridor open. Civilian traffic, clear the path." The F-22 pilots were executing precision maneuvers they had drilled countless times, but never under the pressure of protecting a civilian aircraft with an incapacitated captain. Back in the cabin, passengers were beginning to panic. Phones were raised, capturing shaky videos, some narrating their terror aloud. A man whispered a prayer under his breath. A child clutched her mother's sleeve, tears streaming down her face. Maria tried to keep everyone calm, guiding them to brace positions, repeating that emergency procedures were in place. But the fear in the air was tangible, almost a living thing pressing against the walls of the cabin. Jenna's focus snapped back to the yoke. She forced herself to breathe, to follow the instructions Raven 51 was giving her over the radio. Each command was a lifeline, guiding her trembling hands. Bank slightly left, increase altitude by 200 feet, stabilize. She repeated the instructions in her mind, chanting them like a mantra, clinging to the rhythm as the plane shuddered under turbulence. Outside, the F-22s maintained perfect formation. Cole's eyes were sharp behind his visor, scanning instruments, weather patterns, and the civilian plane's every move. "We are the corridor. You follow us down. We do not fail," he muttered almost to himself. Every pilot knew the stakes. One wrong move, one miscommunication, and Flight 417 would be lost. Inside the cockpit, Jenna caught a glimpse of Mark stirring slightly, a flicker of consciousness passing through his eyes. Relief surged, only to be replaced by dread. He was still far from fully awake. She whispered almost to herself, "Please stay with me, Captain. I need you now." The turbulence worsened, shaking the plane violently. Warning alarms screamed as the aircraft adjusted automatically, fighting the forces of wind and gravity. Jenna fought to maintain stability, voice tight and breath short. Every passenger, every flight attendant, and every piece of equipment depended on her composure. Then came a sound that made her freeze, a low, mechanical grinding from the left engine. Smoke curled faintly along the fuselage and the plane lurched sideways. "Engine 1, pressure drop," Jenna shouted, panic threatening to consume her. She gripped the yoke tighter, listening intently to Raven 51's calm guidance. "Jenna, do not fight it, adjust throttles gradually. You are not alone, I am visual. Follow my lead, keep breathing." She obeyed, adjusting throttles as instructed. The plane stabilized slightly, though turbulence continued to batter the fuselage. Outside, the F-22s flanked the 737, forming a protective corridor, engines screaming in synchrony, keeping other air traffic at bay. Cole's voice came again, steady and authoritative. "You are doing well. Eyes forward, hands steady. We've got you." In the cabin, the passengers sensed the tension and glimpsed the jets above. Some whispered prayers, others held their loved ones tightly. Fear and awe mingled as they realized that the sleek military fighters were not just nearby, they were their guardians, silently promising to guide them through disaster. Jenna's hands were blistered from gripping the controls, knuckles white. Her mind raced, adrenaline surging, muscles trembling, yet she kept repeating the instructions. "Keep calm, follow the lead, trust the call sign. You can do this." And then, for a brief heartbeat, the world seemed suspended. Engines roaring, alarms screaming, F-22s slicing through clouds, passengers frozen in terror, and one young co-pilot gripping the yoke with every ounce of courage she could muster. In that suspended moment, the impossible became their reality. A civilian plane with an unconscious captain, 180 lives at stake, and a single call sign, Raven 51, holding the power to stop disaster in its tracks. The plane shuddered once more. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. Outside, the fighter jets adjusted formation, preparing for the next critical phase, guiding Flight 417 to safety. Inside, passengers clutched their armrests, some whispering desperate prayers. Time stretched taut, every second filled with fear and hope. The question hung in the air like an electric charge. Could a young co-pilot, a mentor's guidance from afar, and the precision of elite F-22 pilots really be enough to prevent catastrophe? The answer would soon reveal itself, but not without testing the limits of courage, skill, and human endurance. The roar of the engines in the cockpit was deafening, a relentless reminder that Flight 417 was suspended between life and death. Jenna Hayes' fingers were raw from gripping the yoke so tightly, her knuckles white and trembling. Every alarm light flashed insistently, painting the cockpit in crimson urgency. She stole a glance at Captain Mark Reynolds. He was still slumped, unresponsive, yet she could detect the faint rise and fall of his chest. Each breath he took was a fragile tether to hope, a reminder that time was slipping away. Come on," Jenna muttered, as if speaking could conjure strength from thin air. Her eyes darted to the instruments, altitude fluctuating, airspeed dropping slightly, turbulence shaking the fuselage. She knew she had to act fast or the consequences would be catastrophic. The autopilot was engaged, but she could feel it resisting subtle corrections, the plane's weight pressing down like a living thing. Outside, the sky was dominated by silver streaks. The F-22s had arrived. They moved with lethal precision, their angular forms cutting through the cloud banks, engines screaming in harmony. Lieutenant Cole Hammond led the formation, eyes scanning Flight 417's every move. He was aware that even a minor miscalculation could send the massive commercial plane spiraling into disaster. Every pilot in the squadron had trained for extreme scenarios, but none had faced this. Guiding a civilian 737 with an incapacitated captain while coordinating with an inexperienced co-pilot. "Jenna, you're doing fine," Raven 51's voice crackled through the radio, steady and commanding. "Ignore the alarms if you can. Focus on the yoke. Trust your hands. You've got this." Jenna swallowed hard. The calm authority in the voice was a lifeline, a steady beat in the chaos. She repeated the instructions under her breath, forcing herself to mimic the precision of someone who had flown countless missions. Her hands moved, trembling yet deliberate, guiding the plane with small adjustments. Each second was a miniature battle, an invisible war against gravity, fear, and the sheer enormity of the task before her. In the cabin, passengers were becoming aware of the gravity of the situation. A young boy clung to his mother, wide-eyed, whispering questions she didn't know how to answer. The elderly couple 2 rows ahead held hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Maria, the lead flight attendant, moved down the aisles like a guardian, offering words of calm that she didn't entirely feel. "Stay seated. Remain calm. We are being guided safely," she called, though her own pulse was racing. Jenna's mind flashed through her training. She recalled the simulator drills: emergency captain incapacitation, maintain control, follow air traffic instructions, use autopilot cautiously. This was not a drill. This was real. Hundreds of eyes were on her, hundreds of lives, including her own, depended on her ability to remain calm under impossible pressure. She felt the plane sway violently as turbulence hit again, the fuselage shivering like a living creature protesting its restraints. "Adjust throttle slowly, increase 5%, level wings steady," Raven 51 instructed. Jenna obeyed, her breathing synchronized with the instructions. The plane stabilized slightly, though every shudder sent a jolt of terror through her. She glanced at Mark again, willing him to move, to open his eyes, but he remained a fragile figure, suspended between consciousness and oblivion. Cole Hammond, watching from his F-22, spoke calmly to his squadron. "Maintain formation. Adjust altitude by 20 feet left, 10 right. Keep the corridor open. Civilian traffic clear." The jets responded instantly, executing maneuvers that were near impossible even under training conditions. They were creating a protective envelope for Flight 417, shielding it from potential hazards and clearing airspace. The supersonic engines thundered, but every pilot's eyes were focused, unwavering. Failure was not an option. Back in the cabin, a sense of tension had become tangible. Passengers whispered prayers, some muttering desperate promises to their loved ones. Phones captured shaky videos, some narrating in real time, others simply trembling in silent terror. Every seatbelt clasped, every hand held, every fearful glance out the window added to the mounting tension. Jenna's hands ached, muscles quivering from the strain of controlling a plane far heavier than her frame suggested possible. Sweat stung her eyes, but she refused to blink. One wrong move, one hesitation, could send Flight 417 into a fatal dive. She remembered every word Raven 51 had spoken, every tiny command, every measured instruction. She let his calm authority guide her movements. Suddenly, a sharp jolt ripped through the plane. Alarms screamed anew. Smoke curled faintly from the left engine. Jenna's stomach dropped as she realized the severity of the malfunction. Engine 1, pressure dropping, "We're losing power," she shouted into the intercom, panic creeping into her voice. Raven 51's calm was unyielding. "Do not fight it. Gradual adjustments. Follow my lead. Focus on stabilization. Keep your hands steady." Jenna obeyed, her body a tense wire of concentration. Slowly, the plane steadied, though the threat was far from over. She felt every vibration, every shudder as if it were a physical hand pushing her toward disaster. Meanwhile, Maria directed the passengers. "Brace positions. Remain calm. This is temporary." She helped a terrified child into the brace position, whispering soothing words. The cabin was a mix of fear and awe, passengers witnessing the precision and courage that had kept them aloft. Cole and his squadron adjusted formation yet again. The lead F-22 moved slightly above and ahead, a constant presence, a living shadow guiding the 737. Each maneuver was executed with surgical precision, timing synchronized to prevent misalignment that could cost the lives below. Cole spoke into the radio again. "You're doing perfectly, Flight 417. Keep your focus. You are not alone." The young co-pilot's pulse pounded. She realized something extraordinary. Despite her fear, she had begun to feel control. The plane was responding to her commands, guided by Raven 51's voice and the F-22's protective formation. Confidence edged into her terror, a fragile, flickering candle in a storm of chaos. In that cockpit, Jenna felt time fracture. Seconds stretched into eternities. Every decision, every micro-adjustment carried monumental weight. Outside, clouds whipped past in violent streaks, the sun casting fleeting shadows over the plane's fuselage. The roar of the F-22 engines and the alarms inside merged into a relentless soundtrack of survival. And then, as if sensing the change, Captain Mark stirred. His eyelids fluttered, a faint groan escaping his lips. Jenna glanced at him, hope surging through her like electricity. But the relief was tempered by reality. He was still weak, still incapacitated. She could not rely on him yet. The next phase of this ordeal rested entirely on her. The passengers, oblivious to the complex coordination in the skis above, felt only the tension. One whispered, "Are we going to make it?" Another clutched a photo, lips moving in silent prayer. Maria moved among them, offering reassurance, yet internally calculating every possible outcome. Jenna tightened her grip, remembering Raven 51's words, "Trust your hands, not fear." The plane responded to her subtle adjustments, leveling slightly. The turbulence eased, though the threat was far from over. Every vibration reminded her of the stakes. Every breath she took was a fragile victory. Outside, the F-22s maintained their relentless precision. Cole's voice came through again. "You're performing exceptionally. Keep your hands steady. Approach runway in controlled descent. We've got eyes on you every step of the way." In the cockpit, Jenna felt a shift, a fragile, exhilarating understanding that she could do this. The impossible was no longer abstract. It was real, tactile, demanding her full attention. Each second mattered, and she felt the weight of responsibility in every nerve, every heartbeat. And still, despite her progress, the reality remained. Flight 417 was a fragile vessel of human lives, 32,000 feet in the air, guided by a terrified co-pilot, protected by supersonic jets, with an unconscious captain at the helm. The world outside watched silently, unaware of the lives balanced on a knife's edge. Jenna took a deep breath, whispering almost to herself, "We're not falling, not today." But the skis above were unpredictable, the plane's engines fragile, and the next challenge could arrive in an instant, threatening to undo every ounce of control she had fought so hard to maintain. The seconds continued to matter, each one a heartbeat closer to either catastrophe or salvation. And in the cockpit of Flight 417, Jenna Hayes realized the terrifying truth. She was no longer a trainee. She was the last line of defense between life and death. Jenna's hands had become raw from the strain, each joint aching from holding the yoke as if it were the only thing tethering her to reality. The cabin around her was a mix of terror and quiet obedience. Passengers pressed their faces against windows, their reflections twisted by fear. Some whispered frantic prayers, others held children so tightly it was almost painful to watch. A middle-aged man clutched a Bible, lips moving silently. Maria, the lead flight attendant, moved with deliberate calm, though the tremor in her hands betrayed the stress she carried. Flight 417, adjust your heading 20 degrees east. Keep a steady descent, maintain altitude variance under control. Follow the lead. Raven 51's voice crackled through the radio, calm, commanding, but not distant. Jenna nodded even though he couldn't see her. She repeated the instructions like a lifeline. Steady descent, maintain altitude, follow lead. The autopilot responded, though sluggishly, and the plane leaned gently, obedient to her trembling hands. Her eyes darted to the slumped figure of Mark Reynolds. He had stirred earlier, but consciousness was fleeting. He could not be relied upon. She was now, terrifyingly, the primary pilot. The F-22s formed a protective corridor around the 737, the sun glinting off their angular bodies. Cole Hammond, leading the squadron, was aware that any minor misstep could result in disaster. Maintain formation, adjust 5 degrees left. Do not break the corridor. Civilian traffic clear, he barked, his tone sharp but controlled. The jets responded instantly, moving in perfect synchrony with one another. Inside, Jenna tried to focus on the minutiae, the dials, the instruments, the subtle adjustments that would stabilize the plane. Her eyes flicked between airspeed indicators, altitude gauges, and the horizon outside the cockpit. The sky was a mosaic of clouds, sunlight glinting off shifting weather fronts, but above all that, the F-22s were there. Guardians, precision incarnate, moving as one. Steady, 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 Jenna whispered to herself. Every shudder of the plane against turbulence sent a jolt of panic racing through her chest, but she forced herself to obey the instructions, tiny adjustments guiding the massive aircraft with painstaking precision. In the cabin, passengers noticed the planes above. Some pointed, whispers turning into murmurs of awe and disbelief. A young boy, gripping his mother's sleeve, asked, "Are they going to crash us?" The woman hugged him tightly, muttering, "No, honey, they're protecting us. They're keeping us safe." Few understood the magnitude of the coordination happening in the sky above them, the precision of supersonic fighters guiding a civilian plane through turbulence and mechanical distress. Jenna's pulse raced as alarms continued to blare in the cockpit. Smoke from the left engine curled faintly, a subtle but terrifying reminder of the fragility of their situation. She adjusted the throttle gradually, listening to Raven 51's calm instructions. Do not fight it, adjust slowly. Gradual movements, not abrupt. Keep wings level. Her hands moved almost on instinct now, guided by a mixture of training and terror. Each adjustment was critical. Too much, and the 737 could tilt into a fatal spin. Too little, and turbulence could send them careening into chaos. The weight of responsibility pressed on her like a tangible force, heavier than gravity itself. Cole Hammond and his squadron moved in lockstep, their jets creating a living corridor. He watched Flight 417's every movement through instruments and visual confirmation. One wrong move, one delay, and the plane could descend uncontrollably. The squadron's engines screamed in unison, powerful yet precise, a symphony of controlled chaos designed to protect the lives below. Jenna glanced at Mark again. His eyes fluttered open, a faint murmur escaping his lips. Hope surged through her, but she forced herself to remain focused. He could not yet take control, not for the final approach. The responsibility rested entirely on her shoulders. Steady your descent, maintain 2,000 feet per minute, adjust flaps to 15 degrees, Raven 51 instructed. Jenna obeyed, moving the throttle and adjusting the flaps. The 737 responded, albeit sluggishly, yet stabilized just enough to give her a fleeting sense of control. In the cabin, Maria tried to maintain order. Brace positions, keep calm, we're being guided safely. She moved to a young woman who was hyperventilating, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Breathe with me. In, out, in, out." The words barely cut through the fear surrounding them, but it was all she could do to calm passengers who were witnessing something extraordinary unfold at 32,000 feet. Jenna's hands ached. Sweat stung her eyes. Her body screamed for release, but she could not let go. One passenger looked at her through the cockpit glass, noticing the tension radiating from her, yet trusting that the woman holding their lives was capable. The fragile trust of hundreds of souls rested on the hands of a terrified co-pilot. Outside, the F-22s maintained formation. Cole adjusted slightly, cutting off any potential interference from commercial air traffic and ensuring the corridor remained intact. Every movement was synchronized, every second calculated. "Stay on target," he muttered. "Keep them safe. Focus." Jenna realized in that terrifying clarity that she was not alone. The F-22s were a constant presence, their guidance precise, their authority unquestionable. Raven 51's voice cut through the static like a lifeline, offering calm amidst chaos. "Trust your hands, not fear. You are doing perfectly. Keep control. Maintain altitude. Emergency crews are ready." The turbulence worsened, but Jenna no longer flinched. Her hands moved with small, deliberate adjustments, almost meditative in their precision. Each jolt of the plane became a signal to respond, not panic. She began to trust the rhythm, the coordination, the invisible thread connecting her to Raven 51 and the squadron above. And then a sudden warning light flashed, a hydraulic pressure drop in the left engine. Smoke now trailed visibly across the fuselage. Jenna's stomach dropped. "Engine 1 failing," she shouted. Her voice trembled, but she did not falter in her movements. The plane shuddered violently. "Do not fight it," Raven 51 instructed firmly. "Gradual adjustments only. You are in control. Focus on stability. Keep your hands steady." Jenna obeyed, throttling the right engine slightly to compensate, her movements precise, almost instinctual. The plane responded slowly but remained airborne. For the first time she sensed control, not mastery, but control enough to prevent immediate catastrophe. Passengers felt the tension. A woman whispered into her husband's ear, "We're going to make it, I think she's got this." Another passenger, a teenage boy, held his backpack against his chest like a shield. Maria moved quietly, her voice soft now, helping passengers maintain composure. The sun glinted off the F-22s as they maintained a protective corridor around the plane. Cole's squadron mirrored every move, their supersonic engines thrumming in perfect rhythm, guiding Flight 417 as though it were a fragile jewel in the sky. Jenna's hands ached, her body trembling, but she felt something she hadn't felt before: focus. She no longer felt like a terrified co-pilot. She was a lifeline, a guardian of hundreds of lives, orchestrating her actions with careful precision under the guidance of a trusted mentor she had never met in person. The plane's shuddering lessened. Instruments stabilized slightly. Passengers began to relax fractionally, still tense, still fearful, but aware that they were being protected. And yet, Jenna knew the danger was far from over. Engine warnings continued, turbulence persisted, and the next phase, landing, loomed on the horizon. One misstep could erase every second of control she had fought so hard to achieve. "Steady, breathe, keep hands firm. You are doing perfectly," Raven 51 said calmly. Jenna took a deep breath. Outside, the F-22s maintained their protective formation. Inside, passengers held each other tightly. The massive 737 was alive under her hands, a testament to her courage, her focus, and the invisible guidance of Raven 51. The plane continued its journey, high above the clouds, poised between catastrophe and salvation. Jenna knew that every second mattered, every decision counted. And in the cockpit of Flight 417, she realized something terrifying and exhilarating at once. She was the last line of defense, and the world was watching without knowing it. Jenna's hands ached, but adrenaline kept her moving. The plane shuddered under every gust of wind, but she no longer felt paralyzed by fear. Instead, a strange calm settled over her. Raven 51's voice was steady in her headset, guiding her through the impossible. An incapacitated captain, a failing engine, and 180 lives hanging in the balance. Keep the wings level, maintain your descent angle. Trust the instruments, trust yourself, he instructed. Each word was a lifeline, a thread connecting her trembling hands to control, to stability, to survival. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Cole Hammond couldn't shake a memory that now gnawed at him in the midst of chaos. Raven 51, the call sign of the pilot who had trained him years ago, was not merely an instructor or a mentor. This was the man who had once pulled him back from the brink of disaster in a simulated combat scenario that had nearly ended in catastrophe. Cole remembered Raven 51's calm authority, the way he could assess a situation instantly, see solutions no one else could, and remain composed even when the world seemed to collapse. Now on radar screens above Illinois, Raven 51 was working invisibly through Jenna, guiding the massive plane through turbulence and mechanical instability. Cole's jaw tightened. Every adjustment Jenna made was critical, but the pattern of her movements told him she was internalizing the rhythm of the instructions. She was learning to trust her hands, and Raven 51's presence, though unseen, was the invisible safety net holding Flight 417 aloft. Back in the cockpit, Jenna caught a glimpse of the left engine's gauge. Pressure was fluctuating dangerously, smoke curling from the nacelle. The shuddering worsened. She swallowed her fear and muttered to herself, "Steady, control, don't fight it." Her mind replayed every emergency drill she'd memorized, but reality was harsher than any simulation. The tactile sensation of the yoke in her hands, the weight of the plane, and the sheer magnitude of human lives depending on her left her both terrified and hyper-focused. Maria moved swiftly among the passengers, her voice calm but insistent. "Brace positions, stay calm, this is temporary." She crouched beside a young mother whose baby was crying inconsolably. "We're going to be okay," she said, though the words felt fragile, like they might shatter under the weight of fear. Around her, murmurs and whispered prayers filled the cabin, a chorus of humanity clinging to hope. Jenna's focus narrowed. Turbulence threw the plane violently to the right, then the left. She corrected slowly, deliberately. Her hands shook, but she followed every word Raven 51 spoke. "Maintain 2,000 feet per minute descent. Adjust flaps to 20 degrees. Compensate for turbulence, don't overcorrect. Keep control. You are doing perfectly." A flicker of movement caught her eye. Mark Reynolds had shifted slightly in his seat, eyes opening briefly. Relief surged, tempered by the knowledge that he was not yet functional. She couldn't depend on him for the descent or landing. The responsibility rested entirely on her. Outside, the F-22s executed perfect coordination. Cole Hammond, in the lead jet, monitored the entire formation. The massive civilian plane below seemed impossibly vulnerable, yet each maneuver the squadron performed was designed to create a protective envelope. Supersonic engines roared, slicing through the clouds, their exhaust heat shimmering in the sunlight. To an untrained eye, it would have seemed like a graceful ballet of silver jets, but every motion was calculated to the millisecond, a razor-thin margin between safety and disaster. Jenna's ears buzzed with the cacophony of alarms, engines, and wind. Her body shook with exhaustion, but her mind was razor-sharp. She was beginning to anticipate the plane's behavior, predicting how it would react to turbulence and throttle adjustments. Slowly, fear was being replaced with focus. "I can do this. I have to." Raven 51's voice cut through the noise again. "You're performing admirably, Jenna. Keep steady. Maintain altitude. Approach the designated corridor for emergency landing. Emergency crews are ready. Do not deviate. Trust your instincts, trust your hands." Jenna followed the instructions, guiding the plane along the invisible path. Each correction, each throttle adjustment brought the 737 closer to safety. The turbulence persisted, But she was no longer fighting blindly. She was anticipating, adjusting, compensating. In the cabin, passengers felt the subtle shift. The plane was still trembling, but the violent lurches lessened. A sense of awe began to replace pure terror. People whispered to one another, "Look, someone's guiding us. Someone is helping her." Few could comprehend the precision required, the orchestration happening thousands of feet above the earth. Cole watched intently from his F-22, scanning the instruments and visual cues. Maintain formation. Adjust altitude 20 feet above civilian plane. Keep clear of commercial traffic. Be ready for descent instructions. The squadron executed each command flawlessly, a living, breathing shield protecting Flight 417. Back in the cockpit, Jenna noticed a subtle improvement. The plane's engine stabilized slightly, and she could sense the rhythm of the aircraft beneath her. Sweat dripped down her temples, yet she maintained a calm exterior. Her hands moved with increasing precision, following the patterns Raven 51 dictated. "Prepare for descent corridor," Raven 51 instructed. "Visual markers are in place, emergency vehicles ready. You are performing exceptionally. Do not rush. One step at a time." Jenna's heart pounded. This was the most critical phase. She adjusted flaps, monitored engine pressure, and maintained altitude. The turbulence continued, yet she could feel the 737 responding to her hands, responding to guidance, as if the aircraft itself was cooperating in the dance between fear and skill. In the cabin, Maria guided passengers into brace positions for the approaching descent. She moved swiftly, speaking words of reassurance while bracing herself. The cabin was tense, almost electric, each heartbeat magnified by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Suddenly, another alarm shrieked in the cockpit, a subtle warning of hydraulic pressure dropping. Jenna's stomach lurched. The plane shuddered violently. She froze for a split second, panic threatening to overtake her. "Do not fight it," Raven 51's voice rang out, calm and precise. "Gradual adjustments, keep wings level, you are in control, focus." Jenna obeyed instinctively, throttling and adjusting flaps slowly. The plane responded, stabilizing enough to avoid a critical descent. Relief washed over her, but it was fleeting. The landing was still miles away, and turbulence, mechanical instability, and human lives remained precariously balanced. Outside, the F-22s maintained their corridor. Cole adjusted formation, ensuring no other aircraft interfered. He watched the massive 737 below, marveling at the courage of the young co-pilot who, guided by Raven 51, had managed to maintain control under impossible pressure. Every second was a calculated act of trust, skill, and human willpower. Jenna's confidence grew, but the fear never entirely dissipated. She glanced at Mark Reynolds. He was still incapacitated, a stark reminder that the weight of responsibility rested entirely on her. Sweat stung her eyes. Muscles ached. Alarm lights flashed. The plane continued to tremble. And yet, amidst the chaos, she realized something remarkable. The impossible was unfolding not by accident, but by a combination of courage, guidance, and instinct. She had become, moment by moment, the anchor keeping Flight 417 from disaster. Her breath steadied. Her hands moved with precision. The plane, still alive and shuddering, followed her lead. Outside, the F-22s glimmered in the sun, guardians of a fragile life suspended between earth and sky. "Steady, keep control, we're almost there," Raven 51 whispered over the radio, each word a thread holding the aircraft, crew, and passengers in balance. The seconds stretched, each heartbeat a measure of suspense, each adjustment a negotiation with fate. Jenna understood with stark clarity that the next phase, descent and landing, would demand every ounce of focus, courage, and skill she possessed. Failure was unthinkable, yet the threat loomed. And high above the clouds, as silver jets streaked across the sky and the 737 trembled beneath her hands, Jenna Hayes realized one undeniable truth. The world would remember this day, not for the chaos, but for the courage, precision, and heart that had kept Flight 417 alive. The world outside Flight 417 was a blur of clouds and sunlight, the Boeing 737 slicing through turbulence like a fragile vessel at the mercy of invisible currents. Inside the cockpit, Jenna Hayes' muscles screamed, her hands raw from gripping the yoke, yet her focus was unyielding. Every flicker of the instruments, every vibration of the fuselage, every shudder of the engines was magnified, a constant reminder of the impossibility of what she was attempting. She was no longer just a first officer. She was the guardian of 180 lives, and the eyes of the world, and a squadron of supersonic jets were upon her. "Maintain descent corridor. Steady your angle. Do not rush." Raven 51's voice came through the radio, calm yet commanding. Each word cut through the alarms and shutters in the cockpit like a beacon. Jenna repeated the instructions internally like a mantra, guiding her trembling hands. "Steady, steady, steady. Trust your hands, trust your instincts." The left engine's gauge flickered dangerously. Pressure had dropped significantly, and smoke now trailed visibly from the nacelle, curling along the fuselage. The plane shuddered violently, causing Jenna's stomach to lurch. She swallowed hard, suppressing the terror that threatened to overtake her. "Throttle adjustment, gradual compensate," she whispered, following Raven 51's precise guidance. The engines responded slowly, but enough to maintain lift, though the 737 trembled like a living thing fighting for survival. In the cabin, passengers sensed the escalating danger. Whispers turned into muted cries, prayers became desperate whispers, hands clutched children, phones, and even seatbacks with white-knuckled intensity. Maria moved through the aisles like a calm conductor amid chaos, guiding passengers into brace positions. "Stay calm. Remain in your seats. Emergency crews are ready," she called, voice steady despite the pounding of her own heart. Jenna's eyes flicked toward Captain Mark Reynolds. His chest rose and fell unevenly, but he remained largely unconscious. Relief surged for a brief moment, then terror returned. She could not rely on him for the descent, let alone the landing. The responsibility rested entirely on her shoulders, every decision critical, every adjustment a matter of life and death. Above, the F-22s maintained their precise formation, a living corridor around Flight 417. Cole Hammond adjusted his lead jet, cutting off potential air traffic interference while monitoring Jenna's movements. The young co-pilot was performing beyond expectations, but every fluctuation of the plane, every shudder demanded vigilance. One wrong move, one miscalculated adjustment could cascade into catastrophe. "Bank slightly left, adjust altitude by 50 feet, stabilize," Raven 51 instructed. Jenna obeyed, hands moving with precision, muscles straining. Each micro-adjustment was a battle against physics, turbulence, and fear. The plane shuddered violently, and alarms screamed again, a reminder that this was not a simulation. Lives hung in the balance with every heartbeat. Outside, the horizon stretched like an endless sea of clouds. The F-22s shimmered in the sunlight, guardians slicing through the sky with supersonic grace. Their presence was both terrifying and comforting. They were a constant reminder that Flight 417 was not alone, that guidance and protection existed even in the face of near-impossible odds. Jenna felt herself trembling, sweat stinging her eyes. Her mind flashed through every emergency protocol she had studied: engine failure, turbulence, emergency descent, approach procedures. Reality, however, was harsher, more precise, and utterly unforgiving. She adjusted flaps, throttled engines, and leveled the wings with trembling hands, following Raven 51's guidance as if her life depended on it, because it did. Emergency landing corridor established, approach vectors set, emergency crews ready, Raven 51 continued. Maintain composure, focus on control, one step at a time. Jenna obeyed, each adjustment deliberate, calculated, almost meditative. She could feel the plane responding beneath her hands, though the left engine continued to falter, smoke trailing visibly. The weight of the aircraft was immense, yet she moved with precision, guided by a combination of instinct, training, and the invisible hand of Raven 51's experience. In the cabin, tension was palpable. A woman clutched her husband's arm, whispering prayers under her breath. Children sobbed quietly, and phones continued to capture shaky videos. Maria's voice, calm but urgent, directed passengers into their brace positions, offering words of reassurance even as her own heart raced. The fear in the cabin was tangible, almost a living thing pressing against the walls. Jenna's focus intensified. She was beginning to anticipate the plane's reactions to turbulence and throttle adjustments, internalizing the rhythm of the aircraft beneath her hands. Slowly, terrifyingly, she began to feel control, not complete mastery, but enough to prevent immediate disaster. Prepare for descent, visual markers in place, maintain altitude variance, emergency cruise ready, Raven 51 instructed. Jenna nodded, her hands gripping the yoke with white-knuckled determination. She adjusted flaps, monitored airspeed, and maintained a controlled descent. Outside, clouds whipped past, sunlight glinting off shifting weather fronts, but above it all, the F-22s remained a protective shield. Cole Hammond spoke into the radio, coordinating with the squadron. Maintain formation. Adjust altitude 20 feet above civilian plane. Keep corridor intact. Monitor all traffic. The jets moved in perfect synchrony, a ballet of precision and speed designed to protect the vulnerable aircraft below. The plane shuddered again, turbulence jostling the passengers. Jenna corrected, guided by Raven 51's voice. Sweat poured down her face, muscles screamed in protest, yet she refused to relinquish control. Each second, each adjustment was critical. The world above, below, and around Flight 417 hung in delicate balance. Suddenly, an alarm blared sharply, a warning of fuel pressure dropping dangerously. Jenna's heart lurched. She glanced at the engine gauges. The left engine was failing. Panic threatened, but she forced herself to obey Raven 51's calm instructions. Gradual throttle adjustments, precise maneuvers, maintaining wings level. The plane responded just enough to keep airborne. Passengers sensed the severity. Murmurs became whispers of fear and awe. One woman pressed her forehead to the window, eyes wide. A teenage boy clutched his backpack like a shield. Maria moved among them, offering reassurance, words of calm that belied the tension pressing down on everyone. Jenna's body trembled, but her mind was a razor. She had learned to anticipate, to respond with precision, guided by Raven 51's voice and the protective presence of the F-22s. She realized, almost in disbelief, that she had become the anchor keeping Flight 417 from disaster. The plane shuddered violently again. The left engine coughed and groaned, smoke trailing visibly. The right engine strained under the added load. Jenna adjusted carefully, maintaining stability. She glanced at Mark Reynolds. He was stirring slightly, murmuring under his breath. But he was not yet functional, and the final responsibility for landing rested entirely on her. Steady, steady, we're almost there. Raven 51's voice came again, calm, unwavering. Jenna inhaled deeply, focusing on the yoke, the instruments, the subtle shifts of the aircraft. The plane responded. Each adjustment, each breath, each heartbeat brought them closer to the runway. Outside, the F-22s shimmered, their presence both protective and commanding, guiding Flight 417 toward the only lifeline they had, the emergency landing corridor. And as the sun glinted off clouds, engines roared and alarms screamed in the cockpit, Jenna Hayes realized an undeniable truth. She had become the last line of defense, and the world, unaware, was witnessing courage and precision at its most human and extraordinary. The descent was underway, the emergency landing imminent, and the moment of truth loomed just ahead. The runway lights below blinked like tiny jewels scattered across the darkened landscape, distant yet tantalizingly close. Jenna Hayes' hands were raw, her muscles trembling from the strain of hours gripping the yoke. Every nerve screamed, every heartbeat drummed with fear and adrenaline. At 5,000 feet, turbulence still shook the plane, the engines groaning under the stress. Outside, the F-22s glimmered, maintaining a protective corridor, their supersonic presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Raven 51's voice crackled through the radio, calm yet commanding. Final approach corridor established. Maintain glide path. Adjust flaps to 30 degrees. Keep wings level. You are in control. Trust your hands. Jenna swallowed hard, repeating the instructions in her mind. Glide path, wings level, flaps 30, trust your hands. The plane trembled violently, but she obeyed, adjusting throttle and flaps with painstaking precision. The left engine, still sputtering, forced her to compensate with the right. The 737 was heavy, unsteady, and fragile in her hands, yet each adjustment brought them incrementally closer to the runway. In the cabin, passengers clutched each other. The young boy held his mother's sleeve so tightly his knuckles were white. The elderly couple whispered prayers under their breaths. Maria moved down the aisles, helping passengers into brace positions for landing. "Stay calm. Remain seated. Emergency crews are ready," she called, though her own pulse pounded violently. Fear was a tangible fog in the cabin, thick and suffocating, yet underlined by awe as passengers glimpsed the silver jets above, the guardians of Flight 417. Jenna's pulse raced. Her hands ached, but she refused to release the yoke. The plane lurched again under turbulence, forcing her to make split-second adjustments. Sweat streamed down her face, stinging her eyes, but she did not falter. Every second mattered. Every movement could spell survival or disaster. Adjust descent angle slightly. Compensate for turbulence, keep wings level, Raven 51 instructed. Jenna obeyed, feeling a rhythm form between her movements and the aircraft's responses. Slowly, painstakingly, the massive plane stabilized. It was still shaking, still vulnerable, yet it obeyed her commands more faithfully now than it had in the hours since Captain Reynolds collapsed. Outside, the F-22s maintained formation. Cole Hammond in the lead jet monitored the 737 closely. He adjusted altitude and position, ensuring no other aircraft interfered with Flight 417's corridor. Every jet mirrored the plane's movements, a living shield keeping disaster at bay. "Focus. Corridor intact. You've got this," he muttered into his headset, though the weight of responsibility pressed on him as heavily as it did on Jenna. Jenna's eyes flicked toward Mark Reynolds. His eyes were open now, and he murmured incoherently, but he could not yet take control. Relief surged, quickly replaced by urgency. She was alone at the helm for the landing. The responsibility for every life aboard rested on her hands. She adjusted flaps and throttles carefully, following Raven 51's instructions to the letter. The glide path was precarious, the turbulence unrelenting, and the left engine continued to fail, forcing her to compensate constantly. She could hear the alarms screaming, each one a reminder of the fragility of their situation. In the cabin, passengers felt the tension reach its peak. A mother clutched her baby to her chest, whispering prayers. A young man gripped the armrest, eyes wide with terror. Every heartbeat was magnified, every sound amplified. Maria moved calmly yet urgently, her voice a tether to composure for the terrified passengers. Jenna's focus sharpened. Her hands moved with precision, almost instinctively now. She was no longer reacting in fear but in calculated anticipation. Every vibration, every tremor of the plane guided her adjustments. The F-22s above and beside her acted as both shields and guides, their supersonic engines a deafening reminder of the protection surrounding her. Prepare for flare. Begin descent correction at 30 feet above runway. Emergency cruise in position. You are performing exceptionally, Raven 51 instructed. Jenna's breath caught. The flare, the final critical maneuver before touchdown, was the moment where any miscalculation could lead to disaster. Her hands gripped the yoke tighter, muscles trembling violently. She adjusted the throttle, flaps, and angle, following every instruction precisely. The plane shuddered violently, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt around her. "Steady, steady, steady," she whispered. Outside, the runway stretched before them, illuminated by emergency lights, a narrow ribbon of salvation. The F-22s adjusted their formation slightly, ensuring that the 737 remained perfectly aligned. Cole Hammond's eyes scanned instruments and visual markers, aware that even a millisecond of delay could result in tragedy. Jenna adjusted the throttle, feeling the plane respond. The turbulence persisted, yet she maintained control. Her muscles screamed, her knuckles white, sweat streaming down her face, but she refused to falter. Each second, each adjustment, was a thread holding Flight 417 together. "Flare now, reduce descent. Maintain wings level steady." Raven 51's voice was calm, unwavering, a beacon amid the chaos. Jenna obeyed, guiding the plane with trembling precision. The landing gear shuddered as it made contact with the runway, skidding slightly but holding. Relief surged briefly, but tension remained. This was only the first critical moment of landing. In the cabin, passengers gasped collectively. Some whispered thanks, others continued to pray, hands clasped tightly. Maria moved down the aisles, offering quiet reassurance. The plane's shuddering began to stabilize as Jenna eased it onto the runway, following Raven 51's guidance for braking and directional control. Outside, the F-22s mirrored the plane's descent, adjusting altitude and position to avoid turbulence disruption. Cole Hammond spoke calmly into his headset, coordinating with the squadron. "Maintain formation. Corridor intact. Emergency vehicles in position." Jenna's hands burned, but she focused on the final adjustments. Brakes applied carefully, throttle reduced incrementally. The 737 slowed, responding sluggishly to her commands, but she maintained composure. Every micro-adjustment mattered. The runway stretched ahead, a lifeline that required absolute precision. Then a sudden shudder, a tire caught slightly on the runway. The plane lurched, alarms blaring. Jenna's heart raced. "Not now, not now." She adjusted the yoke, throttled gently, corrected direction, and gradually regained stability. The F-22s above maintained their formation, protective and unwavering. "Good, steady. Final adjustments, you've got this," Raven 51 said, voice calm yet imbued with urgency. Jenna focused on the instruments, the runway lights, the subtle shifts of the aircraft. Her breathing synchronized with each adjustment, each minor correction bringing the plane closer to safety. Slowly, painfully, the 737 came to a controlled stop, its engines rumbling as emergency crews rushed toward the aircraft. A collective exhale seemed to ripple through the cabin. Passengers clutched each other, some shaking, some weeping quietly. Maria moved swiftly, ensuring everyone remained seated until the plane had come to a complete stop. Relief, awe, and disbelief mingled in the air. Jenna's hands trembled, muscles screaming in exhaustion. She glanced at Mark Reynolds. He was conscious now, weakly shaking his head in disbelief at what had just transpired. Outside, the F-22s hovered briefly, then climbed away, their mission complete, leaving Flight 417 and its passengers alive. Cole Hammond exhaled slowly, the tension of the past hour finally lifting. He knew the plane was safe, and he knew that a young co-pilot, guided by the unseen hand of Raven 51, had accomplished the impossible. Inside the cockpit, Jenna finally allowed herself to slump in her seat, trembling, exhausted, and awed. She had done it. Against every conceivable odds, mechanical failure, turbulence, an incapacitated captain, and her own fear, she had brought Flight 417 safely to the ground. The passengers erupted into applause, tears streaming, hands raised in gratitude. Some hugged strangers, some whispered prayers of thanks, and all understood in that moment that they had survived something extraordinary. Jenna took a deep breath, finally allowing herself to feel the enormity of what had just happened. She had faced fear, chaos, and near-impossible odds, and survived. She had saved lives. Raven 51's voice came through one final time, calm and proud. "You did exceptionally, Jenna. You trusted your hands, your instincts, and you kept them safe. Congratulations." And outside, the sun glinted off the emergency vehicles, the F-22s disappearing into the sky, leaving Flight 417 on solid ground, a testament to courage, precision, and the extraordinary power of human will. The tires of Flight 417 hissed against the runway, smoke curling in thin plumes as the massive Boeing 737 finally came to a complete, trembling stop. Emergency crews rushed forward with practiced precision, guiding the plane into its designated clearing. Inside, passengers clutched each other, tears streaming, hands pressed against faces, hearts still pounding from the ordeal. Some whispered prayers, some wept openly, some simply stared, stunned that they had survived. The hum of engines, the flashing lights of rescue vehicles, and the fatting roar of the F-22s above created a surreal, almost unreal atmosphere. Jenna Hayes' hands still gripped the yoke, knuckles white, muscles screaming in exhaustion. Sweat streaked her face, eyes wide with disbelief and relief. Her body trembled and she felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She had done the impossible. Against all odds, engine failure, incapacitated captain, turbulence, fear, and inexperience, she had guided Flight 417 safely to the ground. Mark Reynolds, finally fully conscious, blinked rapidly, scanning the cockpit as though awakening from a nightmare. He raised a shaky hand, his voice hoarse. You did it." Words failed him. Relief, disbelief, and gratitude warred within him. He could not have landed the plane, not like this, not without Jenna's courage and precision. Maria, the lead flight attendant, moved through the cabin, calming passengers who were still trembling. Her own hands shook slightly, but her voice was firm. "Remain seated until crews clear the cabin," she instructed. Then, leaning toward a young mother clutching her crying baby, she whispered, "We made it. We're safe." The words hung in the air, fragile yet powerful. Outside, the F-22s maintained a high-altitude hover for a brief moment, engines humming with a steady cadence. Cole Hammond, in the lead jet, exhaled slowly. The young co-pilot had performed beyond any expectation, guided by Raven 51's experience and voice. But the mystery of Raven 51's identity had remained intact, a silent guardian whose presence had been both literal and figurative, shaping the course of the rescue from the shadows. Jenna finally leaned back, breathing shallow but steady. The adrenaline that had carried her through the ordeal began to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of what had just occurred. She had not just survived, she had saved lives. She had taken control when the world seemed to be collapsing around her. The passengers began to exit the plane, some still shaking, some embracing strangers, and some looking directly at Jenna through the cockpit glass. Her hands, once trembling violently, now rested on her lap, slightly bruised, slightly swollen, yet still a testament to her courage. Each movement she had made, each decision, had been critical, life-saving. And yet, in the midst of relief, a new wave of awareness struck her. The world above the clouds had been watching silently, and outside that cockpit, someone had orchestrated her survival from a distance. A sudden commotion drew Jenna's attention. Emergency personnel were speaking into radios, coordinating with local authorities. Then, a vehicle approached the plane, military markings unmistakable. Cole Hammond's F-22 descended in a controlled glide alongside, escorting the approaching truck. The realization struck Jenna immediately. Raven 51 was not just a distant voice. He was here, in the real world, and the mystery of the call sign was about to be revealed. The vehicle stopped and a man stepped out, wearing the uniform of the Air Force. Tall, calm, with an aura of authority that seemed to bend the air around him, he approached the plane. His eyes scanned the cockpit, then settled on Jenna. For a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. Every muscle in her body tensed. This was the moment she had not anticipated, the moment of recognition, of revelation, of confrontation with the invisible hand that had guided her through the impossible. "Jenna Hayes," he said, voice calm, firm, yet filled with an almost imperceptible warmth. "I'm Raven 51. Time fractured. The voice that had guided her through fear, that had given her precise instructions, that had kept Flight 417 from disaster, now belonged to a man standing before her. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the calm, commanding voice in her headset with the living, breathing man before her. You were guiding us," she whispered, disbelief threading through every syllable. "I was," he replied, "and you listened. You trusted your hands, you trusted yourself. That made the difference." His eyes were steady, almost piercing, yet filled with a quiet pride. "I've trained pilots for decades, but today it was your courage that saved them all." Mark Reynolds finally found his voice, staggering to the cockpit steps. I couldn't have done it," he admitted, voice raw. "You, Jenna, you saved all our lives. I owe you everything." Jenna felt a rush of emotions, relief, exhaustion, pride, disbelief, all crashing into her simultaneously. She had faced fear, chaos, and near impossible odds, and she had prevailed. She had saved Flight 417. And now, standing before Raven 51, she realized something extraordinary. She had been shaped not only by training but by trust, guidance, and human will. Outside, emergency crews continued their operations, guiding passengers safely from the plane. Media crews would later flood the scene, capturing footage of the miraculous landing and the mysterious presence of the F-22s. For now, however, the air was filled with a quiet sense of awe. People who had moments ago feared death now stepped onto solid ground, hearts still racing, lives forever changed. Raven 51 stood beside the cockpit, his presence calm, unshakable, yet human. "You listened when it mattered most," he said quietly. "That's what makes a pilot exceptional. Not training, not experience, courage under pressure and trust in yourself." Jenna nodded, tears threatening to spill. The world she had known, ordinary, predictable, had fractured and been rebuilt in the past hour. She had learned the weight of responsibility, the power of composure under extreme duress, and the extraordinary results of human courage guided by wisdom. Mark Reynolds finally approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You saved them," he said, voice trembling. "You saved all of us. I can't thank you enough." Jenna exhaled slowly, finally allowing herself to release the tension that had gripped her for hours. Her hands still trembled, but her heart felt lighter. She had survived the impossible and had preserved life in the face of overwhelming fear. Raven 51 turned slightly toward Cole Hammond, nodding silently. The lead pilot acknowledged him with a subtle, mutual understanding. The F-22s had completed their mission, now retreating into the sky, leaving Flight 417, its passengers and its heroes on solid ground. And as the sun began to set, casting long golden streaks across the tarmac, Jenna looked around. The passengers, the crew, the emergency personnel, all bore witness to a moment of human triumph. And in the midst of it, she understood a truth she had learned in the cockpit at 32,000 feet. Courage, focus, and trust, both in oneself and in others, could turn the impossible into reality. Jenna finally allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. "We made it," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Raven 51's eyes softened, a faint smile crossing his face. "Yes," he said quietly, "you made it, and the world will remember this day not for the fear but for the courage." The passengers began to exit the plane, some lingering to whisper thanks, some staring at the cockpit where a young co-pilot had defied impossible odds. The story of Flight 417 would ripple across the globe, a tale of heroism, courage, and the invisible hands that guide ordinary people to extraordinary feats. And high above, the last of the F-22s disappeared into the twilight, a silent testament to the extraordinary orchestration that had kept Flight 417 safe. Jenna Hayes, exhausted, exhilarated, and forever changed, knew one undeniable truth. She had survived the impossible, faced fear, and emerged as a hero. And the world would never forget it.